Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about this report coming from the Esports Observer that the London Spitfire are in the process of releasing their entire roster and coaching staff. This story broke last week on September 30th. Obviously I talked about the story of the Overwatch League Commissioner Pete Vlastelica stepping down. I am now talking about a different story, which I don't normally talk about stories like this one. I try to usually save it for when it's officially announced, but this one's interesting to me, and so I want to talk about it a little bit. I'll have a link in the description down below to the Esports Observer article. You can check it out there, but I'm going to read through it very quickly and talk about it. So, the article says, Overwatch League team, the London Spitfire, is currently in the process of releasing or trading its entire roster and coaching staff from the previous season, according to what sources close to the organization have told the Esports Observer. Sources say that while some players and staff have already been released, negotiations are still ongoing as it relates to the trading or releasing of others. The Spitfire is owned by Cloud9 and managed by Guinevere Capital, so that's, whatever. I should note, and I'll put the tweet up on the screen now, that the London Spitfire coaching staff has already been released. That has already been made public, so it puts a lot of credibility on this story being true, which is part of why I'm talking about it. But obviously the London Spitfire tweet here from October 1st. Today we say farewell to our coaching team of Agape, Pavan, Twinkle, and Skix. We are also thankful for the incredible work you have each put into this team, and we can't wait to cheer you on your next successes. So, the coaches are already gone, which means it is pretty much guaranteed that the other players will be going as well, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Back to the article, sources also say that the Spitfire is looking towards a new long-term model where the organization will cultivate its own talent from teams such as British Hurricane, the Academy team. Additionally, the organization is said to be looking toward Western European players who identify with their geographical market as it relates to sponsorship and partnership agreements. This pivot in its roster creation strategy also serves as a long-term plan that looks to save the organization hundreds of thousands of dollars in salaries. While signing the best free agents on the market in hopes of creating a competition team is a valid strategy, COVID-19 has changed the landscape in that recouping that money has become much harder as live homestands events have been shut down with no future plans from league owner Activision Blizzard in sight. And once again, there is a bit at the end of this article saying this type of change has some precedent. Last May, the Vancouver Titans and the entirety of its Korean roster fell into disarray when some players decided to return home due to COVID-19. It wasn't some players, it was all the players, and that isn't why the roster disbanded, but I'm not going to go on this rant again. This eventually saw the team separate from the organization on mutual terms, not really, and Vancouver eventually signed a new roster formed primarily of minor league North American and Western European players at league minimum salaries. The new team recorded a 3-10 record during the regular season with its new roster, but did end up gaining a large sponsorship deal with Domino's. So, looking at this roster, obviously British Hurricane is the big team to look at here. Isn't a surprise. The British Hurricane roster has been dominant in Contenders Europe so far this season. For several seasons now. And all but one of the players on this roster are 18 or older. The exception is Sparker, or Sparkar, I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce it. He is 17, but he turns 18 in June of next year, June 10th. I don't know what the cutoff is. I don't recall exactly what the cutoff is, but he should be eligible, obviously going into the 2022 season, but he might be eligible for the end of the 2021 season as well. I'm not positive. I know around that time of the year is when the deadline for you to have to turn 18 is. So there's always a chance he gets to play on the London Spitfire next season. It's just a matter of when or if it actually happens. But you have players like Daned, Hadi, Mulfig, Reaper, and Kelix on this team. Two Overwatch League veterans in Reaper and Kelix. Kelix a little more so than Reaper. So this is a good team to look at, obviously a notable team. There's obviously other EU Overwatch League teams that are very good and then have had pretty good results. Young and Beautiful is a good team, definitely one to look at, where they have a number of big name players. I'd say one of the biggest ones is Lulsish. You also have Half a Cool on that team. There's some good players that definitely could be brought in from this team. There's also obviously players in the Overwatch League that you have to look at where they could maybe get players from the Boston Uprising or any team that wants to trade for players from the various teams in the league. I imagine that the Spitfire are going to try to do some trades. I wouldn't be surprised if they traded for, say, fusions, or if they traded for, or tried to trade for KSP and try to get a British player in there, try to get a Cruz or a Funny Astro. I mean, like, if I'm Philadelphia, I think that there's definitely a realistic possibility, at least a consideration, for trading Funny Astro for Sanguinar. I mean, do you do it? Maybe not. Maybe you try to get Sanguinar and another player, or Sanguinar and some money. But I'd 100% consider that move there. So there's always options there. And it's one of the things I think the London Spitfire, when you look at their current roster, they have a huge opportunity to really bring in some big name players, or trade away some big name players to some teams who could be on the search for some things. Because if you look at the players they have, right? Obviously the big ones, for Bernard, Glister, Sanguinar, they were so good this season. Highly had a very good season as well. I think, at least a decent season. Players like Cleston and Although and Shui and even Babel were pretty good this season as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if the London Spitfire were the team to kind of look out for in terms of what players they trade away, and looking at the players that were on this roster and seeing where they go. It's a little too early to speculate who they may or may not bring in terms of European players. I'd expect, obviously, British Hurricane is a team to look at. They're the most obvious thing for them to do. Contenders Europe has been completely dominated by the British Hurricane for the past year and a half or so. It's not even close to the levels of competition for them. Like, they have just dominated everybody. In Contenders 2020 EU Season 1, they didn't lose a single match. They won every single match, so it's really not that surprising to see them performing the way they have been. So I definitely think it is likely that the British Hurricane team does end up as the new London Spitfire. It makes sense. It allows more ability to grow a team, which a lot of teams don't really have right now. Very few teams right now have an actual like contenders roster that they actually like utilize. Most teams just have a couple players that they have had in the past on teams that they kind of will bring in. But especially in North America, the only team in North America right now with a contenders team is Boston. None of the other North American teams have one, at least in North America. The Fusion, I believe, are still connected with T1 over in Korea. But for the most part, you look at the teams in North America, there aren't any. The Chinese teams have a couple, I believe. The Seoul Dynasty has their team still. I don't think Eternal Academy is still active. I could be wrong on that, but I'll double check. I don't think they've really been doing much of anything recently. So, you know, there really are no teams right now other than the British Hurricane in terms of contenders teams competing in especially the Atlantic Conference. It's really just them in Boston, and Boston's team has not been very good. So it's an interesting move. I'm not that surprised it's happening. I think when you play in the UK, and I think you look at what happened with Paris, where they got rid of all of their European players, I think a lot of the teams have kind of come to this realization that the best thing to do realistically is just to either go after talent and spend a lot of money that way, or you have to just cultivate your own talent, and you have to do it locally. Like, if you're going to have talent like that, it has to be through your contenders team, and if you're the London Spitfire, your contenders team has to be European, at least predominantly European, if not entirely European, which means that it realistically just becomes easier to try to home grow a team and then bring them up into the league so that other teams can't take these players from you who have found so much success so far in contenders. It's really interesting. Like I said, a lot of players on this London Spitfire roster now that I would love to see where they end up. Selfishly, I think that you look at players like Bernard and Glister and Sanguinar, they are targets for teams like New York, who I think have that need for a really solid flex tank, a really solid hit scan DPS player, and a really solid main support. Like, these are three players I think are going to be the biggest names out there. Any team that has kind of a need anywhere else, I think Washington could definitely target a number of these players as well. I look, obviously, Sanguinar and Hailey are potential options for them there. Going after any of this team, I think, is a big possibility for any of these Korean rosters. I think Boston will probably try to make some moves, try to acquire some of these players. It's really interesting to see. So I'm intrigued to learn more about this situation and see what's going on and see if any of these players do actually end up getting traded anywhere major, or if it just ends up being a bunch of players released and we will have to wait and see. But this is the roster right now, keeping my eyes on the most, and there's a lot of really talented players on this team who may end up on rosters and be in starting positions, or at least in somewhat close starting positions, kind of just below, like the secondary player on each of these teams. So it's very interesting, and I'm excited to see what happens, or excited is not the right word. Intrigued to see what happens. So I'm hopeful. But that is all for me today. If you have your own thoughts on the situation, let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear from you. But that's all for me. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. We're approaching the off-season, so I'll be doing a lot more roster breakdowns and stuff soon, so be on the lookout for that. But that's all for me. Thank you once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy, and until next time, bye-bye.